Welcome to Practical Wisdom Stories, Soul Searching. My name is Nikki Kleppel, and I'm excited to invite Kate Snowise as our guest today. Kate, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Kate is an expert in avoiding stress and burnout. And so let's start with that. This is obviously a trigger time as some of the statistics around people working from home and actually working more and, that whole work-life balance kind of thing. So what are some takeaways that you have discovered and you give to your clients?
I think it's a really interesting time for us all, and there's so much more pressure coming on than many of us are used to. Pressure from the working from home or just the fear of getting sick. Obviously, we've also been through a pretty turbulent political season. So there are a lot of really unique pressures that have ended up in most of our baskets through this bizarre year that is 2020. And one of the things I always talk about when it comes to stress management and burnout in particular is that we need to differentiate our pressure from stress. Just because we are experiencing pressure doesn't mean that we're automatically going to become stressed from it. And in fact, there are multiple ways that we can interrupt the process, I like to say, or tip the scales in our balance. And so I just like to remind people that we're not completely powerless when it comes to managing the pressure in our lives. We're not helpless victims when it comes to stress. There is a lot that we can do to take care of ourselves and respond to sometimes things that are, really unique, but we can do a lot if we put some effort in and are intentional.
Now, you say about being intentional, which is great, but at the same time, you think about like all the pressures and work commitments and, now having to be a virtual, elementary school teacher or whatever. So how do you respond differently when there are these external pressures? What are some of the tactics that you advise?
Well, in terms of, I think the first thing we can do is ask ourselves, what can I control? And most of us are kind of familiar with that idea, but we don't actually step back long enough from what we are experiencing to say, how can I impact this or control or manage these pressures in a way that makes them easier to deal with? And
Mhm.
so when it comes to COVID and kids and, homeschooling and working from the same place, I've been talking to a lot of my clients about the power of routines. And so many of our routines have gone out the window with COVID. They were, thrown into disarray. And we need to be really smart about how we're putting those back together for this new environment. And children do so much better with a sense of knowing what is coming next, as do we as adults. And because we're working and living out of our homes, I think many of us have perhaps fallen into unhelpful routines. So when I talk about being intentional, it's about putting some forethought into what is the best flow for my household? What is the best routine for us here? That sort of thing can make a huge difference. Another sort of practical tip is I always take time at the start of my week to just kind of get what I like to call is a map of my week. So I will take 10, 15 minutes to look at what I have coming up in the week, what I need to get done, and then just try to put together a little plan, maybe some stuff in my schedule. But it's really sort of calming on our minds to know that we've kind of got a grip or we know what's coming next and that we're accounting for things in the future. And so, in terms of simple little things that you can do, I think a little bit of planning and a routine can go such a long way and just bringing down the pressure a touch.
What happens if you look at that week and it becomes overwhelming? Because then instead of having, oh, okay, I've got a hold of it, you think, oh my gosh, there's so much. And so if that is the case, what do you advise for clients to not feel that overwhelm?
In terms of, there's a couple of things. So, what I was just talking to you about was something called problem focused coping. So, problem focused coping is the idea that we take the problem, take the pressure, and look to actively manage it. When you can't do that, so for example, COVID, we cannot take COVID and actively manage away the risk that we're going to get sick right now. I mean, we can take measures to mitigate that, but we're not all individually responsible for getting rid of COVID. COVID's just a stressor that lives there right now. And so when we cannot control the pressure directly, that's when we have to call on what are called emotion-focused coping mechanisms. And that's really about re-energizing, getting that emotional reserve, that bolstering our sense of ability to cope. And that's a really important energy tank to call on when we are being, called to just keep going. When we can't kind of get a grip, control it all, when we kind of have to surrender and walk through the process one step at a time, those are the type of strategies we need to call on.
And how do we fill up that emotional tank?
It's different for everyone. I think self-care has become cliche, but the reality is it is what re-energizes us. And so I like to think of these strategies as things that nourish our spirits, things that fill you back up at a personal level. And a woman I had on my show, her name is Tara Pringle Jefferson. She talks about us all having our own care instructions, just like an item of clothing or a plant. No two people need the same things to re-nourish. And so I think what's important here is that you take time to get to know your own care instructions. A couple of things I love, and the research suggests are important. Social support. We're social beings. We are born to live in communities, and so that has been something that has been increasingly difficult with COVID. So just making sure that you remember to stay connected with loved ones, because it's good for your well-being as well as their own. But I also like to think of play myself and doing things for no reason other than the joy I get from doing it.
Great. What is something that gives you joy?
Oh, I love reading. I am like, seriously, give me a good book. It has to be nonfiction. But give me a good nonfiction book and I can just get lost. So growth and reading for me are just things that fill up my cup. So if I'm getting inspiration from outside of me, I tend to feel quite filled up.
Yeah, thank you. Me too. I love the reading and some of that growth piece too. One thing too, you talked about nourishing, your spirit, this is soul searching. So maybe, adding on to that view from kind of a spiritual or that soul nourishment. What has this period of time done for you as you reflect, maybe on kind of a higher level? What new insights have you gained?
Oh my gosh, it's been an interesting time. I think I'm a mom. I have a 6 and an 8-year-old boy. I have been working from home through the pandemic, trying to balance them. My husband is a first responder, so he's at work. So it has been an interesting time. What I did find at the start is I had all of these high hopes of how this was going to be a time for me to just deepen myself and learn. And what I realized was that for me, it's been a little bit more of a time of, if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's like, oh, right, like self-actualization is not perhaps what I'm focusing on right now, because my basic needs are still, that's what's calling my attention right now. And so what was interesting for me through this period is realizing that even though we are driven to growth, that it's not like we always master every single step and then we keep going. It's like it's a rotating pool of relearning lessons. And so I haven't been as creative as I hoped, but I have been able to have present time with my kids. And I think when I'm thinking about one lesson or one thing that I've taken out of this is that ability to be more present with my kids.
Thank you. And just even hearing you say that almost like, oh, gives me permission. We both talked about how we're working on books, and at first I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have all this time. And, mm, most times I choose playing Settlers of Catan with my kids or, making cookies. And so thank you to think of that as, maybe right now that's the top of Maslow's hierarchy is making cookies and being present and maybe cutting ourselves some slack.
That's what I've been learning, Nikki.
Yeah. And you talked about kids, and mine are older, 16 and 13. So it's a difference, especially like with a 6-year-old, 8-year-old. What has been either a hack or best practice that you found in supporting them, kind of littler kids?
Oh my gosh. Well, this has been fun for me, right? Like having your children at home a lot more than we used to. I have found that having things out around the house to entertain them has been a big deal. So, what I noticed at the start of this sort of crazy COVID season was I didn't have a plan. And so there was a lot more TV watching than I was comfortable with. And I didn't want that for our family. And so I started to get a little bit more thoughtful around, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And so my house might not be quite as clean as it was, but I'm making sure that they have craft stuff out and they can see it. And they're so much more likely to play with it, I've found, my little 6 and 8-year-old boys if they can see it. So
Okay.
I've had paper out and pens and craft things, and also having a lot more board game time. So we've got into a little bit of a family routine of playing a board game at the end of the day, which is also really special.
Yeah, nice. Those like rituals of connection that can be so valuable.
That's
Terrific. And what about, especially since you are a specialist in stress management, how do you convey those to kids?
Oh my gosh, right? So I feel like I'm an expert on adult stress management. So children are, I feel like they just want us to be present. And so when we're talking about the well-being of our children, I like to sort of say to my clients, like, you need to remember that you're the leader of your household. And it is a stressful time, but our children often will always look to us. And if we can stay kind of calm and centered through the storm, they're likely to weather it a little bit better too.
Okay.
And so, in terms of that's sort of my take on it with adults, but tips for kids, I mean, meditation is a huge thing for us and our well-being as adults, and there are really cool ways you can do that with your children now through things like the Calm app. And so that's sort of a little trick that I have up my sleeve for my boys if they need to sort of be coming back down. That's what
Yeah.
I'll typically do with
And
them.
is there one, I mean, maybe you could even walk us through if kind of a simple one or what's the go-to one in your family?
We do like I like to do belly breathing with my son. So
Mhm.
we will
Would you
like
lead us in it?
I am so not good at leading. I'm not gonna
Okay.
do not good
Okay.
at leading the belly breathing.
Okay.
I was like, I don't know if I can do that on camera. I might feel weird.
Okay.
I get
Maybe that one's hard to train. You can tell us about it though. Is there a certain count? I know it's like to breathe it into your stomach, but is there a certain count that we should be doing too?
I just get my little man to like breathe it in and we close our eyes together and we
Okay.
take a big belly breath. And I put my hand on his belly and I say to him, see if you can make my hand move.
Okay.
And then I don't necessarily count, but with him, I will get it so that he can make my hand move, and then we'll just say hold, and then
Okay.
and I typically do 5 to 10 deep breaths with him, and it's something that just really can bring him back into the moment. He has a little tendency to get very overstimulated, so
Okay.
to bring him back into the moment, which is really awesome.
Yeah, even just that bit right there, I can already, feel that same thing. What about, is there a parenting philosophy that you rely on or?
I'm I'm like, you know what? My natural nature, Nikki, is I'm a bit of a free range parent, and
Yeah.
COVID, it doesn't go so well. So what I have noticed is that a little more structure is really so much better for all of us. And in terms of my natural personality and temperament to kind of be a bit more go with the flow, I've needed to be more conscious through this COVID season that actually structure is what we all need. And so I've been putting that in place very intentionally, but it doesn't come naturally. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just say my philosophy would be about making sure we all know what's coming next, that there's no kind of that the uncertainty is minimized as much as possible has been what I've been focusing on.
That's it. And I guess another thing, like you have such a sense of calm in your demeanor. Were you always this way? What's a story from your childhood that was a defining moment for you?
Oh, that's interesting. I have not always been calm. I would say I'm still not always calm, Nikki. I have a little bit of a tendency to be what I like to call a panic monkey. I can get a little bit wound up. But when I'm thinking about something that was defining, I would say, the one that's just coming to mind was I was a little bit older than a child, but when I went to college, I decided I wanted to be a lawyer. And it was purely because I had watched Ally McBeal. And I had decided that she seemed a little bit crazy like me too, but she was still successful. And law school did not go well for me. I had the grades I needed. I got into law school and then I just flunked out because I legitimately did not go to the classes. And when I think about sort of it being a defining lesson, I think the lesson was that if you don't follow your passion and your heart, it's going to be very hard to find the motivation to be successful.
Mm.
And I'm really grateful that I did not become a lawyer because it was through flunking out of law school that I gave myself permission to follow my passion subject, which was psychology. And I definitely should have always been on that path. So it was kind of one of those divine redirects.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
very
and sometimes that is the case. And I guess it sounds like you're learning to trust your intuition. I guess how else do you know what's to listen to your intuition or like what's that ego? Like, how do you decide which voice in the head to listen to?
I feel like that has been like a life lesson for me. And, that was a divine redirect because the path became one that I couldn't walk anymore. So when I was sort of 20 years old, I wasn't so good at listening to my intuition. And I think if I had been, I would have never taken that path to start with.
Hmm.
Now, I have a daily practice of I do something called morning pages by Julia Cameron.
Oh
Well, that's her
yeah.
idea of morning pages.
The
Which
artist way, right?
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
Which is just 3 pages of freehand stream of consciousness notes. And I use it as a mechanism to tap into my intuition. I do it in the quiet, still hours before my kids and family are awake. And I will often ask questions like, what do I need to hear today? What wisdom is there for me? What do I know that I am not acknowledging? And for me, it's about that part of my routine is a space.
Hmm.
And I believe intuition is quiet. And so if you're going to tune into it, then you're going to have to create the space to do so. And so
Yeah.
I build that
Thank
into my
you.
routine.
I guess one other thing, it's kind of been a crazy year is tell us about your health scare and how you've been able to pivot and react.
Yeah, so that was a little over 2.5 years ago. I
Oh,
was
okay. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
it was a while
Not
ago.
even this time. I guess, yeah, your soul searching came even way before this. Yeah, okay.
So yeah, I was soul searching way before this. I think that's really, really apt. So I was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 35. So it was 2.5 years ago. And I was in full strive mode when I was diagnosed. I was pushing really hard. I was hustling and trying to achieve. And then my whole world stopped for a moment because I was diagnosed with breast cancer and that became bigger, obviously, and needed to be taken care of. And so thankfully, I was diagnosed at stage 1, which was phenomenal and meant that I only needed surgery and then ongoing hormone treatments, but I didn't need chemotherapy. But it really did send me, after I had recovered physically, what I didn't realize was that there would be an emotional backlash, for lack of a different way to put it.
Mhm.
And so it did. It did thrust me into a soul searching mode. And so I feel like I've been kind of doing that and walking that path for the last couple of years. And it's been really powerful. And I would say one of the things that I have been able to kind of step back from is the need to hustle and strive in the same way that I did before
Mhm.
my health scare. So that was it's been a hard lesson for me to learn, and I think so many of us, the society we live in is built on the hustle and the
Yeah.
striving. So to sort of step back from that has been a journey for me.
Yeah. What is something that you have changed your mind about? Maybe
So
you used to have a thought and, either from the cancer experience or another life experience that's made you see things in a different way.
I would definitely say I have changed my obsession with future goals.
Mhm.
I used to always be looking out for, where am I going? How do I get there? And through doing so, I was missing so much of what was already here
Yeah.
because I was obsessively focused on the future and where I was going. And so I think something that's really changed for me is this ability to realize that if I'm not happy while working towards my goals, it sounds so cliche, but the journey, if I'm not enjoying the journey, then what's the point in the trying to get to that destination? So I've become so much more aware of just the present moment, really, and
Yeah.
being happy as I am moving forward, which has meant a lot less of a focus on external goals and more of a focus on all that I already have to be
Yeah.
grateful for.
And you do. You really have such a grateful energy. It just comes through so clearly. So thank you for having that. If you were to summarize either a mantra or, a favorite verse or what would you say or quote, what is that?
I think it
Practical
goes
wisdom.
I think it goes along with this striving idea is that I have previous version of me was very keen on trying to control all possible outcomes. I was a little bit of a control freak, or perhaps a lot. And that doesn't help my panic monkey mind to feel like I want to micromanage my way to wherever I'm going. And so, in terms of stepping into the sense of surrender, one of my favorite personal mantras is that nothing that is truly meant for me will ever miss me. And I believe that so wholeheartedly, that if it's truly meant for me, if the universe wants me to do that or be there, then it's not going to miss me. And so all the micromanaging in the world is not going to be the thing that makes the difference. And so that just really calms my heart and allows me to sort of move into a space of surrender.
Well, and what a gift you've given that to us too. I think it's a lot of people are going through this slow down period. So it's nice to know, okay, if we can also take that philosophy of it's okay to slow down and we're not going to miss any opportunity. So thank you. Kate, thank you already for just a sense of calm and peace and perspective and for being so authentic about your journey and helping our listeners.